Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. Maddie Cole stepped off the campus shuttle at Clearview University and felt the morning chill bite through her jacket. Asheville's air was clean and sharp, and the Blue Ridge Mountains sat like a dark line beyond the buildings. She pulled her duffel close and followed the footpath toward the athletic field. The brochure photos had looked warm and easy. In person, everything felt bigger, faster, and less forgiving. Clearview Athletic Field spread out under a pale sky. The track looked fresh, red surface even and smooth, lane lines bright. A cluster of upperclassmen jogged back and forth, exchanging quick jokes and half-smiles. They moved like they owned the place. Maddie kept her head level and walked to the bleachers. She swapped her worn trainers for spikes that weren't new enough to shine but still felt stiff in the heel. She told herself to breathe. She told herself she had earned this chance. Coach Angela Pierce stood near the start line, clipboard in hand, windbreaker zipped to the throat. Her voice carried. Warm-up laps. Then drills. No wandering. No excuses. Maddie joined the line at the back. A tall guy with a lazy grin glanced over his shoulder. Jake Turner. She recognized him from the roster page, mid-distance star, campus favorite. He gave a little smirk to the girl beside him, Riley Summers, who rolled her eyes in Maddie's direction like she'd seen this story before. The first lap was fine. The second lap stung. By the third, the pace wasn't crazy, but the rhythm was different from home. At Redford High she had run alone most days, steady and simple. Here, the pack breathed as one and cut splits without thinking. Maddie tried to match their cadence, tried not to overstride, tried not to look like she was trying. Her lungs started to scratch. Someone behind her whispered, not loud, just sharp enough to carry. Let the freshmen show us how it's done. A few chuckles followed. Nothing personal, just a message, stay in your place. They shifted into drills, high knees, A-skips, bounding. Maddie focused on the movements, on landing light, on keeping her arms tight. Coach Pierce called out corrections. Riley, stop twisting. Jake, eyes up. Cole, yes, you, relax your shoulders. The sound of her name startled her. She nodded and reset her posture. It helped, but the attention also put a small light on her back. She could feel it following her through the next drill. After a quick stretch, Pierce blew the whistle. 1,000-meter rust buster. I want a baseline. No hero laps, no sandbagging. They lined up. Maddie edged to lane 3, not hiding, not fronting. The whistle cut the air, and the group snapped forward. The first 200 felt stable. At 400 her calves tightened. At 600 she fought her breath. 2 runners slid past her shoulder with clean strides. She told herself to hold, not chase. At 800 she felt the wobble, that little hitch that steals your rhythm. She crossed the line near the back, chest hot, hands on thighs, trying to pull clean air. Laughter came light and easy, the kind that barely lifts a heartbeat. Nice first day, Cole. Another voice, not cruel, just amused. Try it, kid. The phrase clicked like a switch. Maddie kept her eyes on the track surface and counted 5 slow breaths. She had heard worse at home from her own doubts. This was just external noise with fancier shoes. Practice rolled on. Strides on the straight. Core on the infield. A short cooldown loop past the trees. Maddie finished each piece with control, not flair. Pierce didn't praise her, but didn't ignore her either. That felt like a start. After dismissal, the team drifted to the gate. Jake slung a towel over his shoulder and said to nobody, "Freshman energy. Burns hot, burns out." Riley laughed, then softened when her eyes met Maddie's. "You'll get used to it," she said, like a warning and a promise at once. Maddie sat on the bleachers and unlaced her spikes. The field was emptying. Wind lifted the edges of a hot dog wrapper near the fence. She checked her watch. The time wasn't terrible, but it didn't prove anything. She dug a small notebook from her bag and wrote 3 lines, baseline slow. Shoulders tight. Don't chase early. She capped the pen and listened to the quiet. Ava texted from the dorm, "You alive?" Maddie smiled and typed back, breathing. "Barely." She stood, looked once more at the oval, and felt that old tug in her chest, the one that didn't care who laughed. The one that said work is work, no matter who sees it. She walked to the gate and then, for reasons she didn't want to analyze, turned around and headed back to the start line. The stadium lights were off. The lanes were hers. She set her watch for short pickups. 50 meters on, 50 off, 8 reps, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet statement to herself that today wouldn't be the whole story. On the 5th rep her legs found a cleaner turnover. On the 8th she finished with her breath steady and her head clear. When she looked up, she noticed an older man in a faded cap near the top of the bleachers, a paper cup in his hand. She hadn't seen him earlier. He didn't move, didn't wave, just watched like he was measuring something. Maddie grabbed her bag and headed for the exit. She told herself the day had been fine, not great, not awful. She told herself tomorrow would be sharper. At the gate, she glanced back. The man was still there, still quiet, still taking in the empty track. She didn't know his name. She didn't know that he already knew hers. She stepped into the dusk and felt the cool air on her face. The mountains held their line. The field behind her waited. And whatever that laugh meant today, it could stay there. She had miles to build and time to prove, and the next morning she started before sunrise. The stadium lamps were still off, a gray chill sitting over the lanes. Maddie jogged a slow lap to wake up her legs, then cued short sprints the way she'd done the night before. 50 on, 50 off. By the 6th rep her breath burned, but the burn felt clean. She wrote a few numbers in her notebook and tucked it away before official practice crowds rolled in. By 8, the team gathered. Clouds pressed low, wet air clinging to the track. Coach Pierce didn't waste words. Intervals. 10 by 400. Progressively faster. Hit your marks. Whistle up, feet down, and the first rep snapped them into a line. Maddie held middle pace, careful, counting steps into the curves. On the 3rd rep the rain started, thin needles across the surface. On the 4th, the curve turned slick and her left foot skidded. She didn't go down, but the stumble cost her a stride. Someone snorted. Riley's voice floated past, light but sharp. "Watch it." Jake jogged by on recovery with that half grin that says he saw enough. "Happens," he said, like the outcome was already decided. Rep 5, Maddie tightened her form, tried to keep her arms close and quiet. Rep 6, she overcorrected, shoulders tensed, and her breathing turned ragged. By rep 8, she was fighting the clock instead of racing it. Laughter wasn't loud, just a few sounds clipped off at the end of the straight. "Try it, kid," someone tossed. She crossed the line, hands to knees, and counted breaths again. Pierce called times and moved them on. No scolding, no comfort. The work kept coming. Cool down jog. Damp clothes, shoes squeaking. The team drifted to the exits, and Maddie sat with her duffel, peeling off spikes. Her notebook waited under a towel. She wrote, slipped in curve. Arms wasted energy. Fix. When she looked up, the older man in the faded cap stood 3 rows down on the bleachers. Same cup, same quiet posture. He had the same measuring look as last night. He spoke first, voice calm. Your arms are doing too much. Maddie blinked. Excuse me. He nodded toward the track. You're fighting it. Keep them narrow. Let the elbows drive, don't swing wide. And stop staring at the rail. Eyes up. She felt the flush of being seen too clearly. You a coach? He shrugged. Used to be. He didn't offer more. He pointed with his chin. Run one. Not fast. Just clean. She didn't argue. She jogged to the line, rolled her shoulders, and took off at a steady cut. She pictured a string pulling the crown of her head forward, kept the elbows close, let the knees spring instead of stomp. It wasn't pretty, but it was better. When she finished, he gave a single nod. Less wasted motion. Keep stacking that. He turned to go. Name's Holt, he added, like an afterthought. I'm around. Holt. The name hung there. Maddie had heard whispers about a retired coach who still watched from the stands, but nobody said it like it mattered. She packed up, walked out, and texted Ava that she'd be late. Lunch could wait. The field felt different now, like someone had handed her a small tool she didn't know she needed. That night, rain pushed hard against the dorm windows. Maddie reviewed form videos on her phone and mimed arm angles in the mirror, earning a laugh from Ava. You're possessed, Ava said. Little bit, Maddie answered. She set her alarm for early again. If Holt was around, she wanted to be around too. For the next 3 mornings, he was there. Not every second, not hovering, just present. Sometimes he said nothing, sometimes he cut straight through her habits. Shorter stride. Cadence, not reach. Stop collapsing at the hips. Relax your jaw. He handed her a cheap plastic stopwatch one morning without ceremony. Know your splits. Don't guess. She wrote everything down. The numbers in her notebook started to smooth. Not fast yet, but steadier. During team practice, the snide looks didn't vanish, but the punch of them dulled. Jake's grin showed up less, Riley's side eyes softened into curiosity she didn't voice. Pierce remained Pierce. She walked the infield with her clipboard, called reps, corrected mechanics in short jabs. If she noticed Maddie's cleaner form, she didn't say. If she noticed Holt at the bleachers, she didn't look. The routine settled, early work, official work, late notes. It wasn't glamorous. It was a job. On Friday, the sky finally cleared, a crisp blue cutting over the campus. Warm-up felt light, and Maddie held her center better through the drills. During a set of 200s, she didn't drift wide in the curve. She hit the last rep with a split she could live with. When recovery ended, Pierce blew the whistle and gathered everyone on the infield. Her voice carried that blunt edge that makes people stand still. Listen up, she said. 1 week from today we run a 4,000-meter trial. 10 laps. I want to see who actually has a base and who's pretending. Treat it like a race. We'll set lineups for the first meet after that. The murmur rolled through the group. Jake cracked his neck like he'd been waiting for it. Riley shrugged, eyes on the track. Somebody behind Maddie whispered, freshman's funeral. Another chuckle. Try it, kid. Maddie didn't look at them. She looked at the oval, at the bell that would ring on lap 9, at the long straight where she always wanted to panic. Her stomach pulled tight once, then settled. The word trial didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a date you circle in red. Holt didn't speak when she glanced up at the bleachers. He just tapped his watch once and lifted 2 fingers, a signal she already understood, control the first 2 laps. She wrote the plan that night in block letters across a fresh page, start patient. Hold rhythm. Finish honest. Ava read it over her shoulder and grinned. That's your wall poster. Maddie taped the page above her desk lamp. The next morning at dawn, she ran simulation splits alone, smooth open, settled middle, hard close. Midday, Pierce kept the team on tempo work, and Maddie sat right behind a pair of juniors, not clipping their heels, not drifting. Afternoon, she added light strides after dismissal. Nobody saw those. They didn't need to. By Sunday, the field felt like a map. She could see her marks without looking down. She could sense where her breath would want to spike and where her head would want to fold. She could hear the laugh in her memory and file it under background noise. Conflict wasn't just the team's doubt anymore. It was the gap between what she'd been and what she needed to be in 10 laps. The week would be short. The work would be exact. And when Friday came, there would be nowhere to hide, and the week that led to Friday felt like a long hallway with one door at the end. Monday started sharp. Dawn work with Holt, relaxed strides, cadence checks, split control. He stood halfway down the backstretch, tapping the stopwatch and calling numbers that made sense only after she wrote them down. Don't chase comfort, he said. Chase control. Maddie logged every lap, circled the ones that drifted, underlined the ones that landed right. She went to class with sore calves and a steady head. At official practice, Pierce ran them through tempo miles. The pack formed quick and impatient. Jake kept the lead with easy swagger, Riley sat behind him, and the juniors stacked up 2 by 2. Maddie slid into the middle and refused to get whipped by their surges. The first mile locked in. Second mile tightened. Third mile, one voice to her left tried the old script. Freshman's fading. She didn't answer. She fixed her eyes on the far curve and counted 8 breaths, then 8 more. The split landed clean. Pierce glanced at her watch and said nothing, which felt better than praise. That night, fatigue hit. Ava held out a protein bar and a bottle of water like a roadside crew. You're doing the extras again, aren't you? Maddie nodded. A little. Don't break yourself, Ava said. Breaking's not on the schedule, Maddie answered, and meant it. She iced her shins, rolled her calves, and set the alarm for early again. Tuesday turned ugly. Wind pushed across the lanes and chewed at their form. Holt made her run into it, not around it. You don't get to pick conditions, he said. Meet the day you get. She shortened her stride and lifted cadence until the wind lost the argument. During teamwork, Pierce switched to 300s. On the second rep, Maddie cut the curve too tight and clipped a toe. She recovered, but panic nipped her heel. Jake loped past on the next rep and tossed, "Don't trip on race day." Riley gave him a look that wasn't quite approval. Maddie finished all 10, chest hot and eyes dry, and wrote one line in her notebook later, "Panic cost seconds. Breathe before the curve." Wednesday was choices. Holt wanted restraint, her nerves wanted proof. "You're not auditioning for me," he said. "You'll get your stage on Friday. Don't spend the performance in rehearsal." She kept the morning light, drills, a few controlled pickups, nothing that would tax the legs. During practice, Pierce put them on a steady-state run out around campus roads. Hills punished lazy posture. Maddie kept her hips tall and her arms calm. A sophomore tried to push a pace war in the second mile. She didn't bite. She stayed one step back, close enough to bother him, far enough to keep her plan. When they cooled down on the infield, Pierce's eyes flicked to Maddie's shoes and back to her clipboard, as if she'd noticed how little drama Maddie had brought to a session that often produced it. By evening, doubt made its play. Sitting at her desk, red splits and little arrows covered fresh pages. What if the plan was too conservative? What if patience turned into fear at lap 3? She texted Holt a question she almost regretted sending, "What if I start too slow?" His reply came short, "You're not slow if you can close. Trust your last 6 laps." She put the phone face down and exhaled. Thursday was the temptation to prove everything early. Holt met her at sunrise and stood with his hands in his pockets. "No heroics," he said. "2 laps to feel the track. Then go home." She ran 2 laps so clean it hurt to stop. She wanted a third, wanted to rip off a faster rep and taste it. He shook his head before she asked. "Save the coin." She nodded and left the field with more energy than she expected. In class, her mind drifted to the bell lap, to the long straight where crowds can tilt your judgment. She pictured staying long enough in rhythm to earn the right to hurt late. It settled her. Afternoon practice turned into chaos. Rain blew sideways. Pierce made the call to keep them on strides and drills under the stadium overhang. Restlessness buzzed up and down the line. Jake performed boredom like it was a workout. Riley stared at the rain with the face of someone calculating splits anyway. Maddie did the boring things right. Knees up. Ankles stiff. Arms narrow. Pierce's correction slid past her without landing. When dismissal came early, half the team cheered. Maddie didn't. She walked the oval once in the rain after most had gone, counting steps, marking where her breathing always drifted. The water darkened the track and ran down the lanes in thin threads. She let the cold soak into her sleeves and imagined it was race day with no sun to help. Back at the dorm, Ava had already laid out a simple pre-race plan: pasta, water, lights out. They ate in near silence, Netflix mumbling in the background. Before bed, Maddie took the notebook down from the wall and read the line she'd taped up days earlier: start patient. Hold rhythm. Finish honest. She added one more line under it: no one decides your pace. She set the watch on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. Sleep was a negotiation. When it finally arrived, it came in small pieces. She woke before the alarm and lay still, listening to the heater click. Her nerves weren't calm, but they weren't wild. She dressed in the quiet, tied and retied her laces, and slipped out into a morning that had stopped pretending to be gentle. The air bit. The sky held steady gray. At the field, Holt waited with the same paper cup, same faded cap. He didn't lecture. He handed her a folded note and said, "After." She tucked it into her bag and jogged a warm-up lap alone. The lanes felt familiar, like a route she traced with a pencil until the grooves showed through. Teammates trickled in. Jake bounced on his toes and cracked jokes for whoever needed them. Riley stretched and rolled her neck, keeping her thoughts to herself. Pierce blew the whistle and pulled them to the start. 10 laps. No drama in the instructions. No promises. Just the clock. Maddie shook out her arms, then set her feet. She felt her heartbeat, but it didn't race ahead of her. In her head, the plan sat where it belonged: first 2 laps under control, settle into the middle, lean into the last 2. She glanced once at the bleachers. Holt lifted 2 fingers again. Control the open. The whistle cut the morning. The pack jumped. The first 100 meters wanted to drag her faster. She didn't let it. By the line at lap 1, she was behind the noise but ahead of panic. At lap 2, the cadence fell into place like a gear catching. Jake pushed the pace up front to test everyone. Riley sat smart, letting him make the wind payments. The middle stacked and shifted. Maddie held a lane and a breath count and didn't blink at the elbows. By lap 3, the old voice tried its trick: "You're too far back." She answered it by staying where she was supposed to be. By lap 4, someone ahead started to wobble and drift. She slid by without looking at their face. By lap 5, she felt the first pull of fatigue and checked her form: shoulders down, jaw loose. The bell was still a lap away, but the loud part of the race had started in her legs. She didn't surge. She didn't shrink. She made one choice and then made it again on the next straight: trust the plan. The pack began to change shape under the gray sky, and for the first time since stepping on Clearview's track, she realized the noise wasn't stronger than her rhythm. Friday had arrived, and it was exactly what Holt had promised. Nowhere to hide, and, finally, nothing to fear meant she could finally spend what she'd saved, so she held the line and waited for the bell. Lap 6 bled into lap 7 and the track narrowed to what mattered: breath, cadence, the quiet count she'd rehearsed in the empty mornings. Jake still pressed the pace at the front, shoulders squared like he owned the straight. Riley tucked in with that patient look that never bluffed. The middle pack began to fray. One runner lost contact on the backstretch, another drifted wide in the curve. Maddie felt the ache rise and didn't flinch. She checked her arms, narrow, and her stride, spring, not stomp. Holt's voice wasn't out loud, but it was present: earn the pain you can use. Lap 8, the stadium's sound lifted. It wasn't a roar, not yet, but the air got thicker with attention. Maddie slid inside a fading junior without changing her cadence. She saw the white paint of the start line again and crossed it with a time that lived between comfort and panic. 2 laps left. The place on the track where she'd always second-guess herself came into view, far curve into the long straight where crowds can pull you too early. She made the choice she'd promised to make: trust the plan, then test it. Halfway down the backstretch of lap 9, Jake threw a surge to break the group. Riley covered. 2 others tried and cracked. Maddie counted 6 breaths before answering. She didn't lunge, she added half a gear and let the track come to her. When the bell finally rang, metal against morning, something inside her clicked from preparation to action. She heard the clang for what it was: permission to spend. She moved. The bell lap opened with a clean lean into the curve. She kept the elbows tight and drove the knees just a hair higher. The first 100 of that last lap was not about passing, it was about proving that the rhythm belonged to her. At the top of the backstretch she pressed, not with a sprinter's snap but with a distance runner's certainty, the kind that hollows out noise and makes a hole you can step through. The runner ahead, one of the middle guys who'd survived the earlier splits, lost a half step. She came level and went by without a look. The wind had a bite, but it met her like a wall she'd measured already. Jake's stride changed in tiny ways that tell the truth: arms wider, footfall louder. Riley saw it, too. She edged to his shoulder, waiting for the quarter mark to ask the real question. Maddie closed enough to feel their wake. The stadium tilted. A few voices cut through: go, Cole. Hold it, Jake. Stay smooth. None of it landed. She checked one more time, jaw loose, chin level, posture tall, and let the last 200 come to her like a straight debt. Off the final curve, everything narrowed. Jake tried to make one more push and Riley matched it with a clean lift that put her a step in front. Maddie felt the old panic try to spike and met it head-on. She didn't think about winning, she thought about honest finish. She let the stride lengthen the way she practiced under rain and quiet. The track became a line drawn from her lungs to the banner across the straight. 10 meters, 8, 6. Riley held firm. Jake's form frayed. Maddie came even with his shoulder and heard his breath go ragged. She went by. The last 50 meters burned like a fuse and she ran through it, not away from it. A piece of her saw Holt's still figure at the same spot on the bleachers, hands in pockets, eyes exact. Another piece heard Pierce call splits to no one in particular. Most of her didn't hear anything. She crossed the line with her face set and her chest open and the sound finally hit, surprised, then rising, not because she'd won outright, but because she belonged where the race was decided. She staggered 2 steps and kept moving, because stopping too fast is a bad bargain. Breath came back in stutters. She found a lane line with her eyes and followed it while the world brightened around the edges. Riley bent over with hands on knees, then stood and nodded once, simple and earned. Jake ripped off his headband and laughed the kind of laugh that hides a cough. "Okay, Cole," he muttered, not unkind. Pierce gathered them with a clap that cracked the moment. "Times will be posted. Cool down. Hydrate. Don't be cute." Her voice could chill a celebration, but it also meant the work counted. Maddie jogged a slow loop in a small tangle of runners, legs buzzing, mind catching up. When she came past the bleachers, Holt stepped down one row, just enough to be heard without making it a scene. "You didn't run brave," he said. "You ran smart, then brave. That's the order." She managed a smile and a nod that felt steadier than her legs. At the table near the gate, a taped sheet collected names and numbers as Pierce wrote them in clipped handwriting. Maddie didn't push to see. She could wait for ink. Ava found her at the fence with a hug that smelled like cafeteria coffee. "You looked like a machine," Ava said. "A tired machine, but still." Maddie laughed once and let it settle. She pulled the folded note from her bag, the one Holt had handed her before warm-up. She waited until her hands stopped shaking to open it. 3 short lines, all block letters. "They won't believe until you hold your line. Then they'll move theirs. Let them." She read it twice and tucked it back. Showers were loud, locker room louder. Surprise has its own pitch. Riley passed by and bumped Maddie's shoulder with a forearm guard's casual respect. "Good close," she said, like she was adding a line to a report. Jake tossed a towel into a bin and smirked at his own reflection. "Guess the freshman isn't a rumor," he said, like it amused him to admit it. Outside, the day broke clear. The mountains looked closer. The air had that ringing after-storm feel even though it hadn't rained. Maddie walked the short hill back toward the dorm with her bag over one shoulder and her hair damp under a cap. The campus felt different, not because buildings moved, but because her map of it had. She'd drawn a new line on it and everyone else would redraw theirs in time. Results went up on the board outside the field house before lunch. People clustered, then thinned. Maddie waited until the hallway was calm. Her finger found her name without searching hard. The time next to it wasn't magic, but it was honest and dangerously close to the marks that matter. More than placement, the splits told the story: controlled open, stable middle, aggressive close. She didn't take a photo. She didn't need one. That afternoon, Pierce's email hit the team list: provisional lineup for the first meet, training groups adjusted, optional film session with technical notes. Maddie's name sat in the distance group, not as a tag-along, but as someone to count. Holt didn't email. He didn't text. He didn't need to. He would be at the bleachers in the morning anyway, cup in hand, eyes on the lanes. When the sun slid down and campus lights came up, Maddie laced up for an easy 10-minute shakeout because that's what calmed the nerves that celebration can disturb. She circled the quad, past the library's long windows, and returned to the field's edge where the chain-link fence threw a pattern on the sidewalk. She stopped and listened to the quiet buzz of the lamps. The track waited, empty but not silent, like a stage that remembers what was said upon it. She touched the fence with 2 fingers, a habit she hadn't planned, and smiled at how ordinary the gesture felt. She had come here with a borrowed confidence and a notebook full of guesses. She'd leave the day with a plan that matched the clock and a lane that fit her stride. The laugh that used to sting had turned into a measure she no longer needed. What waited next wasn't relief. It was more of the same thing that built this day: work that doesn't clap for itself and a coach who says little and means everything. The door at the end of the long hallway had opened. Beyond it was another hallway, longer, bright enough to see where to place her feet, and the days after the trials settled into a cleaner rhythm. Morning still belonged to Holt. He didn't change much. Same bleachers. Same paper cup. Same clipped notes that landed like tools in her hand. "You held your line," he said one morning. "Now hold your standard." That was it. No banner, no speech, just a new bar she was expected to clear again. Pierce moved faster than her reputation. At practice the next day, she split the distance group into tighter units and put Maddie with Riley for pacing. That choice said more than any comment. 2 by 2,000, Pierce called. Negative split the second rep: if you blow the first, you don't get a second. Jake drifted to mid-distance drills and shot them a half grin on his way by. "Don't fall asleep," he told Riley, then to Maddie, "Try to wake her up." Riley didn't bite. She clicked her watch and nodded once. They started steady, and the track answered back with that firm give her legs had learned to respect. The first 2,000 was honest. They crossed with a split Pierce would tolerate. The second needed nerve. Riley leaned forward at 800 to go, and Maddie matched. Neither of them talked. They moved like people who understood that speed without control is a mess. They finished a shade faster. Pierce marked it and waved them on to recovery without a smile, but the absence of a correction was its own reward. Later, in the field house hallway, the posted lineup for the first meet drew the usual cluster. Names, events, relay legs. Maddie found hers in the distance block with a clean assignment next to it. No asterisk. No TBD. She stood there longer than she needed, reading it twice, then stepped back so a freshman could take her place. That freshman looked at the sheet the way Maddie had looked at every board since arriving, like it might tell the future. Maddie didn't say anything, but the kid glanced at her and squared his shoulders, like proximity alone could transfer a little steadiness. The meet week carried its own hum. Film session in a small room with bad chairs and a projector that threw a pale rectangle on the wall. Pierce ran through clips from other schools. She stopped the frame on a runner who tied up in the final 100. "Watch the arms," she said. "He's fighting himself. Don't be that." She let the clip roll and then clicked to another athlete who stayed narrow and tall under pressure. "Be more like this. No jokes. No fluff." The team scribbled notes. Maddie wrote one line, "Tension steals seconds." Campus started to treat her differently in small ways. A classmate in intro psych asked if she was the runner from the trial. A dining hall worker slid an extra scoop of pasta into her bowl and said, "Saw your name on the board. Good job, kid." Ava acted like nothing had changed, which was perfect. In their room, there was still laundry on a chair and a stack of half-read books on the desk. Stability is underrated. Holt added he'll work to the morning menu. Not the dramatic kind that wrecks you, just gradual climbs that punish sloppy posture. "Pick your knees," he said. "Win the inch in front of you." She learned to keep her head level and her jaw loose even when her quads begged for a shortcut. Back on the track, Pierce kept sharpening pace control, throwing in 400s at the end of longer sets to mimic a hard close. Riley thrived there. Jake, when he dropped by to cool down with them, rolled his eyes at the extra pain and then joined anyway. The first meet arrived under a bright sky that warmed the track just enough to lift moods. Buses lined the curb. Athletes carried spikes and tape and nerves. Clearview's team set up near the far end of the bleachers. Pierce stood with a clipboard and a schedule that ran like a train. "You know your jobs," she said. "Do them." Maddie pinned her bib and jogged a quiet loop with Riley. They didn't talk strategy. They didn't need to. It was the same field as the trial, just with more colors on the lanes. Gun up. Gun down. Early laps settled quickly. Maddie held her middle plan, then looked up at the right time and went with the move she had earned. She didn't win every duel. She didn't need to. She finished with a close that felt honest, and the time next to her name on the results sheet told her the training had translated. When she cooled down past the fence, Holt stood there with his hands in his pockets like always. "Met the day you got," he said. "Do it again." She nodded and let the word sit. The resolution didn't come as a single moment. It came as a series of ordinary ones that stacked into something solid. Riley, after a workout that left them both quiet, said, "You don't flinch when it counts." That was high praise in her language. Jake, at the water fountain, bumped her shoulder and said, "You close like you mean it," then added, "We're gonna need that on relay day," which sounded like an invitation as much as a challenge. Pierce, on a Tuesday that didn't look special, pointed at Maddie's drills and told a freshman, like that. Do that. The kid tried, failed, tried again. A week later, Pierce announced a mentorship pair-up for new athletes. Not a formal program, just practice buddies. Eyes slid toward the usual names. Pierce didn't go with the usual. Cole, she said. Take Davis and Alvarez on warm-up and drills. Teach the line. Don't overtalk it. Maddie said, yes, coach, and kept it simple. Knees up. Ankles stiff. Arms narrow. She didn't give speeches. She showed reps. The two freshmen stopped guessing and started copying. Their movements cleaned up faster than they expected. Effort is contagious if you make it visible. A small campus feature did a story on the team. It wasn't glossy. One photo, a few paragraphs, a quote from Pierce about work over noise. They spelled Maddie's last name right. Ava taped the article to their mini fridge and drew a crooked star next to it. Proof of life, she said. Maddie rolled her eyes and smiled anyway. Not everything smoothed out. There were slow mornings when her legs felt stuck. There were sessions where she missed the pace and had to swallow it. There were faces in other uniforms who tested her harder than she liked. But the ground under her feet didn't tilt the way it had before. The laughter that once marked her place in the pack had faded into regular team chatter. Some of the same voices now asked her, what did Holt say about breathing on the curve, or, where did you start your kick in that last race? She answered with short pieces that matched Holt's style. 3 steps earlier than you want. Hold your line through the rail. Don't chop. One afternoon, Pierce pulled her aside after cooldown. You're not just surviving the sessions, she said. You're setting them up. That was the longest sentence of praise Pierce had used all fall. Maddie said, thank you, and left it there. Later, she told Holt about it. He didn't react much. He looked at the track and said, keep your notebook honest, which for him was a blessing and a warning. The biggest change lived inside the quiet. When she stood at the line for a rep or a race, panic didn't sprint ahead of her. Nerves still showed up, but they behaved. She could hear the bell in her head without losing her plan. She could measure the backstretch without looking down. If she slipped, she corrected. If she tightened up, she loosened. She didn't need to prove that the trial wasn't a fluke anymore. Her feet did that on ordinary days. Late one evening, the field was empty except for maintenance lights and the hum of a distant mower. She jogged an easy loop and stopped near the start line. The paint looked the same as it always had, clean and thin. She thought about the first day she stood here, small and loud inside. She thought about the laugh that had pressed against the back of her neck. She thought about Holt's first correction and the stopwatch he dropped into her palm without ceremony. None of that felt heavy now. It felt like the cost of admission. A freshman from her drill group trotted onto the track, saw her, and slowed. You mind if I do strides? He asked, polite, unsure. She waved him on. Use lane 2. Keep your arms quiet. He nodded and took off with too much enthusiasm, then dialed it back on the second rep, progress in 15 seconds. She watched him finish the 4th, then grabbed her bag. On the walk back, the mountains were a darker stripe against a softer sky. Clearview's brick held the last of the sun and let it go without drama. Her phone buzzed. Ava again. I got extra fries. Hurry. Maddie typed back with one hand, on my way, and tucked the phone into her sleeve. The hallway ahead was still long. There would be more doors. There would be days that didn't care about how ready she felt. But the path was visible now, and the pace was hers. The resolution wasn't applause or headlines. It was the simple, steady fact that she knew where to place her feet, and when the bell rang, she knew exactly how she would answer it, and that certainly changed the way everything else felt. Finals crept closer, winter creased the edges of the mornings, and the schedule tightened. Maddie kept the same plan, early with Holt, official with Pierce, quiet work when nobody watched. The big invitational sat on the calendar like a thumbtack, last meet before the break, and the team treated it like a midterm you couldn't cram the night before. Riley taped her ankle the same way she always did. Jake made the same jokes until 5 minutes to warm up and then went silent like a switch. Pierce stayed Pierce, briefings, assignments, clean orders. No speeches about destiny. Just a job to do. Holt didn't change either. He had ideas about small adjustments and nothing about magic. Cold will steal your shoulders, he said. Keep them loose. Don't hunch. He pointed once at the backstretch. Wind always lives there. Pay it, don't fear it. He didn't ask if she was ready. He had watched the work. Readiness is usually obvious if you look at the days, not the mood. The invitational morning was bright and thin. Breath showed. Spikes felt harder underfoot. Teams in different colors took lanes for warm-ups and moved like little economies. Maddie and Riley jogged quiet laps side by side. They'd built a pace language that didn't need words. Jake cut diagonals on the infield and pretended he wasn't checking the crowd. Pierce gathered them for the last notes. You know your splits. You know your marks. Make good choices. If you get stuck, relax something. That was it. Gun went up. Gun went down. The early laps behaved like early laps. Everyone tried to find space that didn't exist. Maddie held her lane, held her count, held her arms where Holt would approve. The wind showed up on the backstretch and she didn't panic. She shortened the hair, kept the legs turning, paid the toll. At 1600 she looked up, not down, and studied the race the way Holt had trained her to do. 2 runners pushed too early. 1 hung back waiting for miracles. The middle carried the story. Riley sat where the story mattered. Maddie slid near her like a sentence that belongs next to another. Halfway, the ache moved in. Not the panic ache. The honest kind. She took inventory, calves loaded but stable, breath high but not messy, jaw loose, shoulders down. Holt's checklist, line by line. Pierce's voice from a film session surfaced, don't fight yourself, and she dropped her hands a half-inch. It bought her 1 more clean 100. Jake surged on a far curve in another heat and the crowd yelled like it was theirs. Noise can help and it can harm. Maddie kept it outside the lane. The bell would come later, but the choice always started earlier. At 2 laps to go, a runner in a red kit tried to snap the pack. Riley let him go 1 step, then reeled the rope back a half step at a time. Maddie followed without losing her rhythm. She wasn't chasing faces. She was answering splits. They hit the line with the clock on their side. 1 lap left. The bell rang and something old and familiar tried to climb into the frame. Not fear. Memory. The day she wobbled on a slick curve. The laugh that used to live behind her. It flashed and faded because it didn't belong anymore. She didn't need revenge. She needed execution. She leaned into the curve, arms narrow, knees springing. The backstretch wind hit, and she met it with cadence instead of reach. Red Kit started to pay interest on his early loan. Riley pulled even, then passed. Maddie closed the gap like a door that swings on oiled hinges. No drama. Just contact. Off the final turn, the track stretched like it always does, longer than it looks, honest as a timer. She didn't burn the first 10 steps, she let them stack. Then she spent what she had banked. Her stride lengthened without flail, her head stayed level, and her chest stayed open. She came past Red Kit and felt the fight go out of his elbows. She drew to Riley's shoulder and saw the line coming the way you see a street you've walked 1,000 times. Riley held. Maddie held. They crossed in a hard, clean finish that made sense given the week they'd built and the months behind it. Cool down hurt, like it should. Legs heavy, lungs loud. They jogged together, not saying much, not needing to. Pierce met them at the gate, checked her clipboard, and gave one nod to each. It wasn't warm. It was earned. Jake jogged up from his own event, flushed and pleased, and smacked Maddie's palm. "That's the close," he said. "Keep it on call." She laughed once and then coughed it out. Results posted, and the numbers were good enough to prove something without pretending to crown anything. Personal best by a slice. Season best for the squad. A split chart full of the disciplines she'd learned to trust: patient open, stable middle, honest close. A student reporter asked for a quote and got something simple. "We ran our plan." It read plain on the page. It was supposed to. Back on campus, the work didn't transform into legend. It turned into habit. Holt still watched mornings and still tossed short notes that changed how a rep felt. Pierce still ran the team like a sharp instrument. Riley still trained like a metronome. Jake still played to the room and raced to the line. Ava still left sticky notes on the mirror that said boring things like eat and sleep, which are the only miracles that always cash. The mentorship pair kept asking Maddie small questions and she kept answering in small pieces. Eyes up on the second curve. Don't grow your stride, grow your cadence. If you're tight, untighten something. One evening before break, Holt sat 2 rows down on the bleachers while the field lights hummed and the air smelled like cold rubber. He spoke without looking at her. "You know what you did?" She waited. "You learned to move the line. Not just yours. Theirs." She thought about the first day, the laugh, the notebook with shaky numbers, the stopwatch now scuffed from being carried everywhere. She thought about how the team had started to hold her pace on hard days instead of pushing her off it. She thought about the kid who had watched her drills and changed his own. "I just ran," she said. Holt's mouth nudged upward. Exactly. The lesson wasn't complicated. Build the miles nobody sees. Keep the form when the wind pushes. Trust the plan longer than your fear wants you to. Spend late, not early. Answer with your feet. Let other people decide what to say. You decide what to do. It fit on one page of a notebook and took a season to learn. On the last morning before buses scattered for winter, Maddie jogged a quiet lap alone. The mountains were a deeper blue, the sky a flat gray, the track the same red that had watched her first stumble and her latest finish. She stopped at the start line and touched the paint with 2 fingers, the small habit that had turned into a promise. Across the field, Riley waved and headed for class. Jake yelled something about a pickup game later and didn't wait for an answer. Pierce crossed the infield with her clipboard and a scarf and nodded once without breaking stride. Holt stood where he always stood, cap low, hands in pockets, a piece of the place. Maddie shouldered her bag. She had notes to review, a bus to catch, and a break that would still include running because that's how you keep the line where you moved it. She looked at the lanes one more time and felt that steady click inside, the one that told her what mattered had nothing to do with noise. It was the same quiet thing she'd built all semester: show up, do the work, keep the form, close with intent. The laugh that used to chase her had turned into breath behind her, then into silence, then into memory. The track didn't remember jokes. It remembered splits. She walked out through the gate with the field at her back and winter in front of her. The hallway ahead wasn't shorter, but it wasn't dark. She knew where to place her feet. If the bell rang today or tomorrow or next season, she already knew her answer. And if someone asked later how she turned a taunt into a finish, she'd tell them the only true part: it wasn't magic. It was mornings and minutes and a plan you keep when it's uncomfortable. It was moving your line until it changed the room. It was the simple, steady fact that when the race became honest, she stayed honest with it, and that was enough to be remembered.